The continuation of chapter 5. Foretelling of Moses. One of the kings of the 18th or 19th dynasties was informed by his astrologer or sacred scribe that a child would be born to the Hebrew nation. If he were permitted to live, he would bring the Egyptian kingdom to a low condition. The child was born. His name was Moses. He was reared in a miraculous way in Pharaoh's own palace by his daughter. The plot to destroy Moses in his infancy failed. The daughter of Pharaoh adopted Moses as her son. She came to her father and said, "I have brought up a child who is of a divine form and of a generous mind. And as I have received him from the bounty of the river in a wonderful manner, I thought it proper to adopt him for my son and the heir of thy kingdom." When she put the child into Pharaoh's hand, he hugged the child and put his diadem upon his head. But Moses cast down the diadem to the ground, and in a childish mood, he twisted it around and stamped upon it. The sacred scribe saw all of this. He was the same astrologer who foretold that Moses' birth would bring down the Egyptian kingdom. Because of this, the astrologer cried out in a terrifying manner, saying, "This, O king, this child is he of whom God foretold that if we kill him, we shall be in no danger. He himself affords an attestation to the prediction of the same thing by this trampling upon thy government and treading upon thy diadem." The astrologer advocated to have Moses executed in order to free the Egyptians from fear and to deprive the Hebrews of hope and freedom. At this intense moment, the daughter of Pharaoh took the child quietly. Because the king loved his daughter, he was not disposed to hurt her. When events arrived at this juncture, the divine providence protected Moses, prevailing upon the king to spare him. Moses was educated, as Josephus says, and it is highly probable that he received the best education the ancient world could give. We must remember that Egypt possessed institutions of higher learning and that Pharaoh's palace and temple was the chief center of the educated class. Moses was exposed to the best Egypt had to afford. Those who think Moses was just an ignorant religious leader are quite wrong. Moses knew the political, social, and natural sciences of Egypt. He learned the religious system, the political system, mathematics, geometry, biology, chemistry, anatomy, foreign languages, law, engineering, and military tactics. Josephus writes the following: Moses arrived at the age of maturity, and he displayed his virtue and abilities to the Egyptians. The Egyptians interpreted Moses' actions as their imminent doom and the elevation of the Hebrews. During the course of Egyptian history, there were many wars with the Kushite kingdom of Ethiopia. Sometimes this region is known as Nubia. When Moses had reached the age of maturity, the Ethiopians were making incursions into Egyptian territory. The Egyptians were in a state of bitter distress because of these predatory attacks. Josephus said that they penetrated as far as the city of Memphis or Memphis near the Nile Delta. Because of the urgency of the military situation, the Egyptians made an inquiry through the oracles and the prophecies. They were told by their God to secure the assistance of Moses. Then Pharaoh commanded his daughter to bring Moses into his presence. But first Pharaoh had to swear to his daughter that no misfortune would happen to him. Moses was brought into Pharaoh's presence, informed of the deteriorating military situation, and given generalship of the Egyptian army. The Egyptian priests gave only tacit approbation to his new assignment. They were skeptical of his loyalty and hoped that he would be killed in the ensuing battles. The Hebrews were greatly exuberant because of the promotion of Moses. They expected Moses to liberate them. Moses marshaled his army and marched southward. He did not follow the Nile, but took the inland route, cognizant of the fact that the Ethiopians would be most vigilant at the river. But the land route presented a severe danger. It was inhabited with deadly serpents, which this area produced in mass numbers. Legend says that these snakes fly in the air and descend on men unaware. For that reason, Moses devised an ingenious plan to combat these evil creatures. He filled baskets with an animal called ibis and transported them along with him. These ibis are very dangerous to the snake family. They fly after the snakes and consume them completely. When Moses approached the land of the serpents, he let loose the ibis and they destroyed the snakes. Then Moses came upon the Ethiopians secretly, vanquished them in battle, and demolished their cities. Those that escaped retreated to Sheba, their capital. Josephus says that Saba was a royal city of the Ethiopians, which Emperor Cambyses of Persia afterwards renamed Meroe after his sister, or Meroe after his sister. The capital of Ethiopia used to be located at Napata at the Fourth Cataract. Later it was moved to Meroe. Moses found the city of Meroe well fortified. It was surrounded by a high wall, and there was a river around the wall that made it look like an island. The city was constructed so strongly that when the water of the river became violent, it could not move the foundation of the city. The city of Meroe was extremely difficult to subdue, and the army was lying idle. Then the daughter of the Ethiopian king happened to see Moses as he led the army near the wall, fighting with great gallantry. She finally arranged a treaty of peace with Moses, agreeing to surrender the city if he would marry her. Moses consummated the marriage and departed with his wife for Egypt. Moses returned to the capital of Egypt during the reign of one of the kings of the 19th dynasty, probably Ramses I or Seti I. The Egyptians hated Moses even more when they found out that he was successful in battle. The Egyptians became suspicious of Moses because they thought he would incite a slave insurrection, so they conspired to assassinate him. When Moses learned of the conspiracy, he escaped to the land of Midian. Ramses II. Ramses II was the fourth king of the 19th dynasty, 1292 to 1225 BC, and the son of Seti I, or Skiti I, Seti, I. He was pure black, had thick lips and a broad nose like the people of the western Sudan today. He was a warlike pharaoh, industrious and energetic, ruling Egypt for 67 years. In early years of his reign, he engaged in the important campaign against the Hittites. At Kadesh, near Syria, the battle was indecisive. Finally, he signed a permanent peace treaty with the king of the Hittites, married the king's daughter, and the remaining years of his life were relatively peaceful. Ramses II is also known for his national public work projects. Because these projects required the forced labor of thousands of Hebrew slaves, he is known as the Pharaoh of the oppression. He was a boastful, vainglorious, tyrannical personality who sought to astound humanity by covering the country with megalithic structures. This Ramses transferred the capital to the Nile Delta. The Black Jews constructed the treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. Ramses developed the Nile Delta and had the slaves build Egypt's megaliths, the colonnade at Luxor, and its gigantic pylon, in front of which he placed 6 colossal statues of himself. Each of these statues was almost 60 feet high. Ramses II erased his predecessors' names from the records and substituted his own. This Ramses also constructed the hypostyle hall at Karnak and the temple called the Ramesseum near Thebes. During this period, Egypt enjoyed a high degree of prosperity, a great boom just before the recession. When Merneptah, the son of Ramses II, came to the throne, the entire empire was falling apart. Moses entered Egypt, probably during the reign of Ramses II or Menempeh. He, Moses, was commissioned by the God of Israel to go down into Egypt and to tell Pharaoh to let his people go. Moses did not have any great difficulty entering the palace of Pharaoh. He had been reared in the king's palace, and he knew Egyptian protocol. He decided to enter the palace at the time that Pharaoh was entertaining various ambassadors from foreign nations. After Egypt was weakened and terrified by the scourge of the 10 plagues, Pharaoh agreed to emancipate the Hebrew slaves. Beginning with the reign of Menempeh and the kings of the 20th dynasty, Egypt was in a state of decline. There were revolts throughout the empire. It is evident that the emancipation of the Hebrew slaves may have triggered these revolts, producing a chain reaction. Weakness at home and attack from the external enemies marked the defeat and decline of the empire. In the 10th century BC, the Libyans invaded Egypt and established the 22nd Babastine dynasty. Under this Libyan dynasty, Egypt tried to revive the empire. Shishak invaded Palestine and entered into combat with the Davidic dynasty. At this time, most of Shishak's troops were Libyans and Cushites. After 200 years of Libyan rule, the Cushites invaded Egypt and the Middle East, making themselves a great power. Then the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and Arabs invaded Egypt consecutively, terminating Egyptian rule. Cush, Ethiopia. The ancient country of Cush was in the eastern Sudan region of Africa. During the Middle Ages, the Sudan was not united and organized as a single country. The Afro-Asian world considered the Sudan to be that territory extending from the Sahara Desert almost to the equator, its widest part nearly 1,000 miles. Also, it extended from the Atlantic Ocean to the highlands of Ethiopia in the east, its longest part about 4,000 miles. This vast area includes such countries as the modern Sudan, Chad, Niger or Niger, Mali, Guinea, Senegal, Gambia, Upper Volta, etc. During the colonial period, this area was divided into two parts, called the French Sudan in the west and the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan in the east. The word Sudan is an Arabic word meaning black. The Arabs called this vast area Bilad es Sudan, the territory of the black, because the tribes here were very black, unmixed tribes. In dealing with the kingdom of Cush, we find that it is located in the eastern Sudan near the Red Sea. The country of Cush was situated on both sides of the Nile River between the third and sixth cataracts. The modern nation called the Sudan occupies this territory. The important cities of ancient Cush were Napata, Meroe, Muswara, Kura, Kurgas, and Naga. There were two civilizations of the Ethiopian people in the continent of Africa. One was in the highlands of Ethiopia, with its capital at Aksum. The second was located in the region of the present-day Sudan, with its capital at Napata, and at other times at Meroe. The people in the ancient country of Cush were called Nubia or Nubians as subnames. Other subnames they use are Bejas or Bisharin, which are subtribes. These people It would be correct to say are northern Ethiopians who live in the Sudan. European writers make a practice of calling various tribes in Africa by the infamous name Negroes. True Africans are indeed Africans, regardless of what they look like. The Africans have their own tribal names, and they do not need the European appellations of Negritans, Negroes, Negrillos, or Negroids. Kushite conquest. When the power of the Libyan kings of Egypt began to wane in the 18th century, the northern Ethiopian king, Pianki, marched from his capital of Napata and invaded Egypt. The Kushite kings of Napata and Meroe were subservient in the, to the Egyptian crown for over 1,000 years. They paid tribute mostly in gold, ivory, slaves, cattle, and fighting men. At this time, the Ethiopians were brazen enough to challenge the world's greatest empire. Pianki's elite troops and his mighty naval forces attacked city after city until they reached Memphis. Hermopolis fell before him. Even the capital of Osirkon III at Heliopolis could not withstand his advances. The enemy capitulated at the capital, and the supremacy of Ethiopia was established in Egypt. Rogers says that Pianki sailed for his home in the south, his ships laden with silver, gold, copper, clothing, and everything of the Northlands, every product of Syria, and all the sweet woods of God's land. His Majesty sailed upstream with a glad heart. The shores on either side were jubilating, west and east singing, O mighty ruler, Pianki, thou comest having gained the dominion of the north. About 712 BC, there arose another king, Ethiopian, over the city of Napata. This new king was called Sha'aka, or Sabakan, the brother of Pianki. He established the 25th Ethiopian dynasty in Egypt. According to Manetho, he burned Bacchorus alive, the alleged ruler of the 24th dynasty. During the long history of the Middle East, there have always been wars between the military powers north of the land of Israel, by way of Syria, and the military powers south of Israel, Egypt. Israel was the Betzah Bal Hapatish Ben Hassan, the egg between the hammer and the anvil. In the time of Ahaz and Hezekiah, the kings of Judah, Assyria, and Egypt were the great powers. Both of these powers had threatened the independence of the little state of Judah. but with the help of God, she arrived. She survived, excuse me. The prophet Isaiah had told King Ahaz to stand still and do nothing. In other words, Isaiah meant do not make any alliances with Assyria or Egypt, but trust in the God of Israel. One of the most famous generals of Shabaka was Taharka or Turdaka, the son of Pianki. This Ethiopian general advanced against Sennacherib, excuse me, the king of Assyria, while the Assyrians were threatening the existence of Judah. Taharka captured Philistia in the year 688 BC, but was defeated at Elatec, west of Jerusalem, by the Assyrians. Also, Taharka was the third king in the 25th Egyptian dynasty, 715 to 663. At first, he defeated Esarhaddon, but 3 years later, 671, he was expelled from the city of Memphis and never returned. Ethiopia, this African state, became a great power, even though it was only for a period of 100 years. If Assyria had not emerged when she did, Ethiopia probably would have lasted another 100 years as a Western Mediterranean power. Because the Ethiopians were defeated by the Assyrians, we must not conclude that their existence and influence was stifled or choked out. Indeed, Rogers says that Natsan, a later king of the Ethiopians, defeated the great Persian conqueror Cambyses in 525 BC. At this time, the Ethiopians continued to exercise a political and economic influence over the African tribes to the south and the west, in the same way that culture and civilization spread from Greece and Rome over the entire continent of Europe. In the same manner, culture and civilization spread from Egypt and Ethiopia to other parts of the continent of Africa. It seems that the Kushite civilization developed in two stages, first at the famous city of Napata, and second at the industrial city of Meroe. The political power of Napata was predicated on the affluence of gold. Here is an excellent description of the abundance of gold in Ethiopia. Cambyses thrust his authority far up the Nile, past Thebes and the First Cataract, into Ethiopia. This exotic country aroused the curiosity of the Persians with its elephants and ivory and gold. They said that the prisoners in Ethiopia wore fetters of gold. Ethiopian domination on the Nile began to rise after the decline of the Libyan kings of Egypt during the 10th century. Kashta was one of the greatest kings of Napata. He began the conquest of Egypt, which his son Pianki continued. The city of Napata was located inside the river bend between the third and fourth cataracts. History is witness to the fact that the greatest civilizations developed alongside riverbanks, and so it was with the Ethiopian cities of Napata and Meroe. Meroe was a greater city than Napata. It was located between the fifth and sixth cataracts and between the Nile and the Atbara rivers. Meroe is a very ancient city. As you have read, Moses, the Hebrew, led an Egyptian army against it about 1350 BC. Obviously, it was standing when Tut- Tutmos, Thutmosis I, 1540 to 1501, established his southern frontier in Ethiopian territory. This frontier was located past Napata, almost to the Fifth Cataract. Between 595 and 550, the capital of Kush was transferred from Napata to Meroe. The primary motive for this transference was because of the Persian attacks against Ethiopia after 595 BC. Two other reasons probably contributed to the removal of the capital. One, the city of Meroe was surrounded by grassland containing scattered trees. Two, there were large deposits of iron ore found in this area. The iron ore rendered a great impetus to the civilization of Kush and other African tribes. L. Rogers, F. Adams, and W. Brown, European writers, state that there is evidence that in the days when Europeans were still satisfied with rude stone tools, the Africans had invented the art of smelting iron. Excavators have even found the furnaces in which the iron ore was smelted, and they have found mountains of iron slag. Retention of Kushite identity. Although the Egyptians dominated parts of Ethiopia for over 1,000 years, the Ethiopians to a great extent maintained their own identity, ideas, and customs. The Kushites were never absorbed nationally into the Egyptian social structure. It had been postulated by some authorities that the pharaohs of the 25th Ethiopian dynasty accepted Egyptian gods. Nevertheless, these kings were interred in their tombs in a position that accorded with Ethiopian tradition, but not according to Egyptian customs. After the year 5000 BC, there emerged a more distinctive Kushite culture, similar to a Kushite Renaissance. The gods are the gods of Meroe, not Egypt. The stone ram, symbolic of the power of the god Amun, stood outside the temple of Naga, a Kushite city. The Meroites employed the Egyptian hieroglyphic writing in their temple, but after 225 BC, they devised their own alphabet, even before Rome became a great power. They began to create fine pottery with their own original styles. Also, they constructed majestic temples and palaces of beautiful design. Many of the ruins of ancient Kush are still standing at Meroe. Musarat, Naga, and near Napata. Basil Davidson says these sites are waiting for more archaeologists with time and money to be excavated. The Kushites built a powerful empire in Africa that extended far and wide. Their political and military sway extended to the Red Sea, to the Aksumite kingdom, to the south. Evidence has been found that Ethiopian influence extended to Lake Chad and to the Uganda territory. There was even trade with Arabia, India, China, Egypt, Aksum, and the neighboring tribes. Cush was no playboy on the international stage, but was recognized and known among the greatest powers of the day. The Ethiopians fought successive wars with the Egyptians, Hebrews, Assyrians, Persians, and Aksumite under the Aksumite kingdom they fought the Arabians. Cush was a sophisticated power, and during her greatness, she became the mistress of the South. The greatness of Ethiopia is written in the annals of the ancient nations. She dispatched her ambassadors to the known nations of her day. Herodotus, the Greek historian, knew little about the Ethiopians. Furthermore, he did not visit this intriguing land. When Herodotus heard of this land, he called the people Aethiops. In the Greek language, this word means burnt face. He never called them by their national name, which is Cush. Finally, the civilization in the highlands of ancient Ethiopia at Aksum began to rise. King Ezana of Aksum marched down to the city of Meroe and attacked it, putting an end to its greatness. The causes of the wars between Meroe and Aksum probably were trade competition and the influx of Nubians from the Sahara. The black African Hebrews of Egypt and Ethiopia. From what period can we certify the existence of black Hebrews in Egypt and Ethiopia? It is certain that Israelites were in Egypt and Ethiopia during the period of King Tekla of Egypt, 23rd Tanite dynasty, about 725 BC, and the prophet Isaiah of Jerusalem, because we read in Isaiah 11:11 that, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, Upper Egypt, and from Cush, Ethiopia." In Isaiah 27:13, we get the understanding that the outcasts of Judah are in the land of Egypt. In 1918, the prophet is positive that 5 cities with Jews and Egyptian converts will accept the God of Israel and will speak the language of Canaan, Hebrew. About 70 years after Isaiah, the prophet Zephaniah 3:10 says, "From beyond the river of Ethiopia, my supplicants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering." Many authorities have agreed that Zephaniah was speaking concerning the Jews who were dispersed and who colonized the region in and around Ethiopia. Since the Hebrew prophets and his historians, for example, Josephus, knew that Jews were in Egypt and Ethiopia, the next question is, what are some of the theories concerning their arrival in these countries? The theories are as follows. King Solomon married the daughter of the king of Egypt. Obviously, this marriage was for economical and political reasons. 1 Kings 11:1. Solomon wanted to maintain international peace, security, and commerce. It is probable that he arranged with Pharaoh, his father-in-law, to establish Jewish trade colonies on the Nile River. By the way, Solomon married the daughters of many kings to keep them under his economic and political control. In 1 Kings 9:26, we read that King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion Geber, which is beside Etoth, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram, the king of Tyre or Phoenicia, sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon. And they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold, 420 talents, and brought it to King Solomon. Many scholars have postulated that the land of Ophir is on the east coast of Africa. This would be in Ethiopia territory. It would appear highly probable that Solomon would establish trade colonies along the east and west coast of the Red Sea. Ancient Ethiopia had excessive gold deposits to satisfy Solomon's need. As had been mentioned previously, the Persian troops of Cambyses said the prisoners in Ethiopia were fetters of gold. The Queen of Sheba visited Solomon. The fact that her visit occurs after the voyage of Solomon, Hiram's navy, to Ophir suggests that in the mind of the writer, Ophir was associated with the territory of that rich Queen of Sheba. Apparently, when the navy of Solomon came to Ophir, the Queen of Sheba heard about the greatness of Solomon. Josephus, the Jewish historian, certified the fact that the Queen of Sheba was the Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. This would mean that Jewish trade colonies were established in her territory. Josephus also says that the royal city of the Ethiopians was Seba or Sheba. The two words are interchangeable. According to the Ethiopians and the black Jews of this country, the Queen of Sheba gave birth to a son of whom they say Solomon was the father. Moreover, they say that other black Jews accompanied the queen back to Ethiopia. The name of the child whom she gave birth was Menelik. Years later, as the story is related, Menelik returned to Jerusalem for his education. On his return trip to Ethiopia, Solomon sent along with him some leading priests and officers. All of these events occurred during the 10th century BC. This was probably the first organized Jewish colony in Ethiopia. In the same century, Sheshach, the king of Egypt, invaded Palestine. 1 Kings 14:25. Without doubt, he must have transported many Jews to Egypt and Ethiopia because he took prisoners with him, and his army consisted of Libyans and Ethiopians. During the late part of the 8th or the early part of the 7th century, the Ethiopians, the Ethiopian general Teraka invaded Palestine and captured more than a few towns. The prophet Isaiah certainly knew what he was talking about when he spoke of the Israelites' exile in Terhaka's country at that time. Even the advance of the mighty Assyrian army would motivate many Israelites to take refuge in Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. Again, the incursions of the powerful army of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in the years 698 to 675 into Palestine undoubtedly caused rapid and numerous migratory waves of Israelites to flee into North and East Africa. In Jeremiah 44:1, the prophet addresses the Jews in Egypt and the Jews that live in Pathros, which is southern Egypt. Jeremiah tells the Jews in the 11th verse that they are not safe from Nebuchadnezzar. This warning would naturally influence many Jews to migrate deeper into Ethiopia and the Sahara Desert. By the time of the prophet Zephaniah, about 630 BC, Ethiopia and the adjacent lands of Uganda and Kenya were swarming with black Jews. Zephaniah says, 3:10, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersal, shall bring mine offering." This verse is an indication that the Israelites would be multiplying and making converts among the inhabitants beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. No doubt this prophet had communication with the Jews in this remote area. The rivers of Ethiopia connect with the Nile water system in the heart of Ethiopia. The Atbara River extends from the highlands of modern Ethiopia to the Nile. The Blue Nile extends from the direction of Addis Ababa in a northwestern direction toward the Nile. Near Uganda and the northern Congo is the Bahr el Ghazal River. It is 500 miles long in southwest Sudan, formed by the confluence of the Bahr el Arab and Jur rivers in the northwest upper Nile. It flows east to unite at Lake No with the Bahr el Jebel and form the White Nile. These areas are beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Moreover, are there any records or oral traditions of the existence of the Jewish tribes deeply beyond the rivers of Ethiopia? Joseph J. Williams cites a particular case. He said, "There can be little doubt but that somewhere in the dim past, probably by way of Abyssinia, a wave of Hebraic culture penetrated to the Lake District of East Africa, if we may credit the following citations. Speaking of Uganda, to the west of Lake Victoria and northeast of the Belgian Congo, it has an organized native government with a tradition of 33 kings and a legendary line that traces back to King David. It is a proud history. The legends tell of the Uganda people crossing the Nile, remember, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, centuries upon centuries ago, and subduing all tribes whose country they traversed. They claim the highest native civilization in Africa. The above report is highly credible in all its details, if we keep in mind what I have written pertaining to the Egyptian and Cushite Jews. The thing that might be questioned about the Uganda people is not their identity, but the vitality of the Jewishness of their region, of their religion. Tabian and Tabian Kamant and Wasambara Jews. Professor Alan S. Godby says that the word Tabian means smiths. He has located these Jews in central Ethiopia. The Tabian Jews were really Falashas, but they were formed to accept a nominal Christianity. They were like the Marrano Jews of Spain, forced to accept a religion against their will. The word Falasha in Amharic, the official language of Ethiopia, means immigrants. The Falashas did not call themselves by this name. They used the name Bet Israel, the house of Israel. But the Abyssinians called them Falashas, because the other tribes in Ethiopia called the house of Israel Falashas or immigrants. This would suggest that perhaps the Falasha Jews came to Abyssinia at a later date. Therefore, they were ostracized because they did not accept Christianity. The Falashas held the monopoly on the skilled trades in Ethiopia. They were leather workers, potters, smiths, and masons. The Kamant Jews were separated into two classes. The Kaberti, honored. From these, the priests are chosen, and the Yatanti, small or insignificant people. By the way, these two classes were called by names that are similar to the Hebrew. The Kamant Jews esteem Moses highly, and many other Old Testament personalities. They observe Yom Kippur and the feast for the dead. Because they remain isolated from other Jews, Christians, and pagans, they learn very little from the external world. About 1,300 miles south of the territory of the Falashas live the Wasambra people. They are a variety of colors from light brown to black. In their land are found asylum institutions, cities of refuge. They are like the Levitical cities found in the Old Testament. Professor Godby says, taken with sacrifices, wherever Judaism is acknowledged, there must have been introduced by Yemenite or Himyaritic Jewish traders in very ancient times. Concerning the Wasambra people along the east coast of Africa, opposite the island of Zanzibar, we know very little, but it is a known fact among scholars that Jewish merchants from Yemen traded along the coast. It is possible that Jewish colonies were established there at an early date. North, excuse me. It is also a probability that Jewish tribes migrated from the north. I have shown previously that Jewish immigrants crossed the Red Sea into Ethiopia and that Jewish immigrants migrated from Egypt to Ethiopia. My conclusion is this: the nation of Ethiopia became a confluence or crossroad of a wave of Hebrew culture and settlements. Here in Ethiopia was the great center of the Black Jews. They exchanged ideas. Some settled down to stay. Others departed to the west and south. Joseph L. Williams, quoting Walter Churchill, Plowden, the British consul in Abyssinia, agrees with my conclusion. After the British consul reviewed the national records and traditions, he concluded two things are certain: that at a far later period, 6 sovereigns of pure Jewish race and faith are found throughout Abyssinia. I think it also highly probable that at whatever epoch it may be placed, the whole of Abyssinia was of a Jewish persuasion previous to its conversion, as even those who have adopted the Christian creed still maintain numerous forms and observances. As we can conclude from the above and other records, the Christians of Abyssinia were once Jews. Incidentally, Solomon Grazel, in his book A History of the Jews, has stated that there still exist 100,000 black Jews in Ethiopia who are not Christian. After King Abraha, of Ethiopia accepted Christianity in the 4th century AD, a great change occurred that was disastrous to the existence of the Jews. They became victims of persecution that lasted for many centuries. Ever since the rise of Christianity in Ethiopia, Judaism has been decreasing. Yet, in spite of social pressures and discrimination, 100,000 black Jews have been able to survive. This multitude of Jews surviving under horrible, hostile conditions proves their greater numerical strength earlier in their history. End of chapter 5, part 2.